and bring welcome. It is Saturday morning on Wednesday, Saturday, March the 13th, here in Arkansas, but it is 4 o'clock in Orla's time in Ireland. And I'm Dustin Seaton. I'm president of Arkansans for Gifted and Talented Education. And thank you all for joining us live on Facebook. There's several of you watching live on Facebook and several that are joining us on our Zoom webinar. If you are just now joining on the Zoom or the Facebook part, you do not have to worry about muting or unmuting or turning your cameras off or on. The Zoom webinar feature will just be those that are the presenters today. And if you have any questions, you will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A box that are available at the bottom. I believe our presenter is going to speak for about 30 minutes and then open up for questions. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll try to get to them at the end. But this is a very timely topic. In Arkansas, just this week alone, there's been several legislators and our state legislature talking about transgendered legislation. And so it's a very timely topic. We are excited to hear from you today, Orla, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth, because Beth Osborne is a teacher in Northwest Arkansas that first brought the idea of having a webinar and bringing some attention to this issue based on some interactions with her students and parents in her school district. And so we're super excited to support our Agate members and their wishes and desires. And we encourage any of our other Agate members out there, if there's a topic of interest that you would like us to talk about, please bring that to our attention. We'll do our best to address it. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Beth, to introduce our speaker.
Hi, my name is Beth Osborne. I teach K through 5 gifted in Northwest Arkansas. And last year I had a non-binary student, and even though I feel that the staff I work with responded with the best intentions, it wasn't always best practices for the student's well-being. And so after fuming over it for a while, I reached out to Dustin, and he helped me.
I think we lost you, Beth. Might have been your internet. She was doing this earlier too. It was just on and off.
Okay.
I can jump in if she's
today. So she's going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we have our Q&A.
All right, you're back.
Oh, sorry.
It cut out for a second, Beth.
Oh, want me to introduce Miss Orla again?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So Orla is the residential coordinator and equality officer at the Center for Talented Youth at Dublin University. So I'm going to pass this over to her. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Beth, and thanks to Justin as well. Thanks to Arkansans for Gifted and Talented Education for having me today. Thank you to all of you watching and giving up your time on a nice Saturday morning. I am just going to share my screen. Okay, and I'll just give you a brief introduction. So as Beth said, my name is Orla. I'm the Residential Coordinator and Equality Officer at Centre for Talented Youth Ireland in Dublin City University. I have a bachelor's in literature and a master's in American literature, with a particular emphasis on literature of the Southern United States. And I'm currently an educational doctoral student at Dublin City University. My research interest is in this topic in gifted and LGBTQ youth, and specifically how we can better serve them in our schools, organizations, and our communities. I have 2 forthcoming book chapters on this topic. One is specifically on working with gifted, trans, and gender non-conforming learners, and another one is a collaborative chapter with Dr. Alina Treat for the Introduction to Gifted Education series. My advocacy work in this area began about 7 years ago when I was a part-time staff member at CTY Ireland, and we had a transgender student who challenged how they were in their residential grouping. So when I became a full-time staff member, I decided to put together some systems and processes that I could make this easier and more affirming and supportive for our trans, gender non-conforming, and all LGBTQ students that we had taking part in our courses, and to create some practices for staff as well. So I believe we will run for about 30 minutes of presentation. I'll try my best to stick to that, and then we'll have questions for 30 minutes. Sorry, I actually wasn't sure of the setup, so I can see I had put in about asking questions during, but I think Justin and Beth are going to moderate that, and I'll be happy to answer them all at the end. If I don't know any answers, I can come back to you on it. You are free to email me as well. I have my details at the end. The most important thing that I would definitely say is that there are no stupid questions and there's no judgment. We're all coming from a place of learning, and I'm really happy to help with anything that I can. So we're just going to do a brief, short introduction to some terminology. I think we're all fairly familiar to the basics of LGBT, and then Q is another one that you will often see added to this acronym for queer or sometimes questioning. So the word queer, which was obviously previously used as a slur, has been reclaimed in recent years, and it's often used as an umbrella term like queer community or queer theory. And people might use it in relation to their sexual orientation and or their gender identity. So some organizations use other variations of LGBTQ. We just happen to use that one. You may see LGBTI for intersex. You may see the A included for asexual, or A plus symbol to denote other identities which fall within this spectrum. So I've just done a little descriptor there, as sometimes those are terms that people are not as familiar with. Intersex is somebody who's born with biological traits, which could be hormonal, physical, biological, endocrinal, that don't align to singular male or female definitions. And non-binary, which is something that Beth referred to there, and something that we personally at CTY Ireland, we're starting to see a lot more students identifying as non-binary, which would be somebody who does not identify as either male or female. They will usually use they, them pronouns. So you would say they are going to the shop instead of he is going to the shop. So just a brief definition. And again, it is actually difficult when I can't see all of you, because I was going to ask who is familiar with all these terms, but I will go through it as kind of quickly as I can. And again, if you have any questions about this in the end, do feel free to ask. So sexual orientation and the difference between these three things, because all of these three things are very different and independent of each other. So our sexual orientation defined by the people that we are or are not attracted to, gender identity, our internal personal sense of gender, and gender expression which would be our external presentation of gender through actions, demeanor, or clothes. So it's important to recognize that these three things are independent of each other, and gender identity does not equate to gender expression or sexual orientation. Each of these three things are unique and individual. Okay, so I think sometimes, obviously, we have a lot to talk about terminology, but it is important to bring that to what is the lived experience of LGBTQ young people and people. So the core attractions that form the basis for our adult sexual orientation typically emerge between middle childhood and early adolescence. Many people know that they have same-sex attractions long before they pursue relationships with other people. This may be suppressed, sometimes well into adulthood, due to prejudice, discrimination, either directly experienced or due to a general understanding, particularly for younger people, that being different is a bad thing. One recent study found that the mean earliest age of which adult trans people first experienced a sense of gender dysphoria was age 7. Now, obviously, coming out much later than that for trans people, and pursuing any other kind of interventions or transitioning much later again as well. This was the statistic that I found when I was trying to find one this week about what percentage of young people in the United States identify as LGBTQ, and it was 9.5%. So it's important that we are thinking about these interventions and how we can support this number of students. So this is a document that I refer back to a lot when I am creating different work because it's really brilliant, to be honest. So GLSEN's Biennial National School Climate Survey, it documents the unique challenges that LGBTQ students face, and it identifies interventions to improve school climate. This is a great resource because not only do they do a national school climate survey, but they will also do a state-by-state snapshot. So if you're interested to see what the experiences of the LGBTQ students are in your home state, you can access that on their website. And they also give you the option to do your own school climate survey. And it's a free resource as well. And it's really brilliant, really easy to use and put together. So the next few slides will just have some facts and figures from the most recent survey, 2019. And it was completed by 16,713 students between the ages of 13 and 21. 98% of LGBTQ students in the United States in 2019 heard the word gay used in a negative way at school. 95% actually heard homophobic slurs. 86% of LGBTQ students experienced harassment or assault. 59% experienced discriminatory policy or practices. Some of these that they listed were being prevented from using changing rooms or bathrooms that aligned with their gender identity, prohibited from discussing or writing about LGBTQ topics for class, or prevented from attending a dance or a function with a student of the same gender. So for this then, 19% of LGBTQ students were taught positive representations about LGBTQ people, history or events. I think we would all agree is quite low. Only 13% reported a school policy to protect LGBTQ students. However, 97% said that they could identify at least one supportive educator. I was very interested in this kind of discrepancy of there is a really high amount of students, almost all said they could identify a supportive educator, but very few reported positive school policy or that they were satisfied with interventions made to protect them. Obviously, we don't have an answer for that. I would say maybe that supportive educator is sometimes constrained by administration or anything else, that maybe they can't perform some of those other things. However, what I do think is great is that it really does go to show that if you are the person in your school organization or community who is displaying their support for LGBTQ students, that really goes a long way to help these students feel safe. So to get into talking a little bit about gifted LGBTQ students. Gifted LGBTQ students may face identity struggles at a younger age than their peers due to accelerated cognitive development and the desire to pursue information. I've put in a few statistics here over the next slides from the studies that we have on gifted LGBTQ students, which some of you may know is not very many. Obviously, it is increasing each year, but as you'll see, some of these statistics are repeated, and I certainly do find myself using similar articles over and over again because they're the only ones that we have. The gifted lesbian, gay and bisexual students in Peterson and Rishgar's study, they didn't have students who identified as trans or queer. They reported feelings of isolation, anxiety, depression. They also reported high achievement and involvement in activities, sometimes even over-involvement. The majority of gifted LGBTQ students in Hutchison and Tiesso's critical ethnography study reported feeling different for being LGBTQ, was 85%, and feeling different for being gifted, 75% of students reported that. Half of the participants also expressed feeling anxious about the social repercussions of their identities. Gifted LGBTQ students may engage strategies of self-preservation in order to avoid unwanted or negative attention from their peers. Strategies might include hiding their identity, developing different personal and private persona, suppressing non-stereotypical gender behaviors, or overcompensating for these non-stereotypical behaviors with exaggerated mannerisms. These are two quotes that I took from Hutchison and TS's study to show the mixed feelings that these gifted LGBTQ students had about their identities. So one student said, the gifted identity started the severe self-hate and issues that I had with myself, and the gay identity just added on to it. Another student said, the gifted part of me caused me to be inquisitive and ask questions and helped me define who I was. And then it helped me decide whether I wanted a label or not. So it's also important to recognize that gifted LGBTQ students who hold an additional marginalized identity or identities may experience additional stress in balancing different aspects of who they are or who they feel they should be. This quote is from a journal article by Christopher Sewell, which is a really, really brilliant article. I am not sure whether this PowerPoint will be circulated. I'm happy to circulate it. I do have all my references in it as well. But I highly encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to read this article, because I just found it really brilliant in how he discusses identity. So it's an autoethnography that explores his identity as a Black, gay and gifted student. And this was a quote that I took from it. Suppressing different points of my identities became critical to my success in school, perhaps especially by influencing my interactions with peers. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to give you some strategies to support LGBTQ youth, whether that's in your school, in your organization, in your community. Hopefully these will be of use to you. So the three main groups that I've put these strategies into are presenting a model of affirmation, individual empowerment, and collective empowerment. This picture actually as well is a picture of one of our former students who does not mind me using it. And I like including that. She's a big supporter still of our organization. So, presenting a model of affirmation. One of the most important things that you can do with this is challenging anti-LGBTQ language if you hear it. This, is everywhere, and it's not only in the hallway with students, but also amongst your colleagues or anti-LGBTQ ideas. It's important to make specific provisions for anti-LGBTQ harassment and bullying in your current school anti-bullying policy, or if you have a code against discrimination. It's really important to lay that out, and maybe even to think about, how does your policy, or does it at all, define homophobic or transphobic bullying? You really want to leave no interpretation for as well what anti-LGBTQ language is. One example that I would have is that our current policy explicitly states that if you call a transgender student by the wrong name, or you misgender them once, that's a kind conversation, and it can be considered a mistake, but that if this is repetitive, it is harassment and bullying. Also, of course, you want to ensure any issues of anti-LGBTQ harassment are addressed with appropriate consequences, and maybe you want to make clear in your policy or code what those consequences are. In terms of working with your colleagues as well, as sometimes I know that can be a difficult thing that people feel constrained by, because maybe they have different ideas than their colleagues do. I always think that it's a really good start to just come from a place of safety. We all want our students to be safe. And we know that when students feel safe, it leads to, so many other great things within the school, and for those students, general improved academic achievement and decreased absenteeism. There is a good bit of research that supports that as well. Including LGBTQ representations in curricula. So you can think about this in very broad ways. And I know sometimes people think, okay, well, I'm, a math teacher, so I don't see how that necessarily can apply to me. But very small changes, like including a same-sex couple as part of maybe a foreign language problem, or using gender-neutral pronouns for someone in a math problem, can really go a long way for students to feel included and to feel seen. It's good to avoid limiting your inclusion of LGBTQ content and representations to a single class or period of observance, because that only really serves to kind of still other those students. It's really much better to have that representation kind of incorporated throughout. Of course, as well, you want to support LGBTQ students to undertake projects that are relevant and meaningful to their experience, which is something that a lot of students in that GLSEN survey reported was not happening. So individual empowerment. Of course, you want to offer LGBTQ students validation and encouragement if they choose to come out to you. That's a very big step, and there's every chance that you might be the first person that they're speaking to about this. So your reaction is really important. You want to be prepared if a student approaches you about maybe changing their name or pronouns. Just even have an idea in your head about, okay, if this happens, what will I say? What will be the next part of the process? And how will that process be managed within your school or organization? It's great to kind of have something like a flow chart or something in place so you know what will happen, and also how you could possibly make that process easier for the student as well, because you want to avoid that student having to go to different individuals, repeatedly having to say their new name and pronouns. And it's great maybe if there's one person in the school who could take on managing that process for students. In terms of that as well, as was even I think referenced by Justin earlier, and we all know it, bathrooms and changing rooms are unfortunately a very highly politicized space for trans and gender non-conforming youth. It's important to think about how that might be managed within your school or organisation. About half the students surveyed in that GLSEN School Climate Survey said they avoid bathrooms and locker rooms completely because they don't feel safe. And, I think we would all agree that these students have enough on their plate without having to worry about simply where they're going to go to the bathroom. And the final thing I would say for individual empowerment is, and this goes for if you maybe you need a bit of extra help as well, or a colleague needs extra help, you can always connect with local LGBTQ youth advocacy groups. I have some resources at the end as well that you can access, but there are lots of different ones within each state as well. Collective empowerment. So something that you could do when you've moved past, presenting a model of affirmation, empowering these students as individuals. How can we collectively empower all of these students together? One great thing to do could be to organise a school participation in the Day of Silence, which is a national student-led demonstration where LGBTQ students and allies take a vow of silence to protest the harmful effects of harassment on LGBTQ students in schools in the United States. A brilliant thing to do if you can is to create forums for these students like a GSA where they can foster community and share collective experiences. Having a dedicated GSA consistently correlates with lower experiences of victimization for LGBTQ students, and they are more likely to report feeling safe within their school and even see increased representation in other aspects of their learning as well when a GSA is present. GSAs are also a great opportunity for students to engage in activism and advocacy work. That could be within the school, within your local community, or broadly as well. I like to think of these three kind of strategy groupings as one leading to another. So by presenting a model of affirmation, which begins with all of you, and obviously you're already doing a great thing by giving up an hour of your Saturday to be here and listen to me speak about this, leading to individual empowerment for students on an individual level, and then collective empowerment. And that's really where, you know, we see big differences for how students flourish in different settings. So finally, I think I've kept close enough to my time. These are 3 resources, and I have actually linked these as well if within the PowerPoint as well. If anyone wants a copy of that, you can join the National Association of Gifted Children GLBTQ network. I am our social secretary, which unfortunately we couldn't really do too much socializing at the last conference. And the network is a really brilliant way to keep in contact with other people and to be able to access resources and different supports for yourself or students within your school or organization who are gifted and LGBTQ. You can, if you are part of NAGC as a member, you can add that network membership as well. We really are always looking for more members, and it is really a great way to keep in touch. GLSEN is a really brilliant resource. So their website has lots of different kind of curriculum ideas. If you wanted to get involved in anything like the Day of Silence, it has, you know, different things that you can do with that as well. They really do have a lot of great kind of ideas. And of course, as well with GLSEN, you can access all of the different school climate surveys, or you could even create your own school climate survey as well to see how LGBTQ students are faring within your school or organization. And finally, PFLAG, which supports LGBTQ people, their parents, families, and allies. They have 400 chapters across the United States. Their website has lots of downloadable resources, online learning programs, and publications on how to be both an advocate and an ally. So that is pretty much all of my time. Probably the most important thing that I could express to you today is that I very much operate from a framework that if a student is speaking to me and saying that, you know, this is my truth, my role as an educator is just to support them whatever way I can, even if it's really small. You know, when we create a good open dialogue with students where they feel safe to express themselves, you can allow them to be empowered and then empower each other. So gur míle maith agaibh from me, which is thank you Oscailga. And those are my contact details. That's my email address and my Twitter handle if you would like to get in contact. And I will stop my sharing now so we can move to the question portion.
Thank you. That was awesome. I didn't know about GLSEN and all their resources.
Yes, they're brilliant resources, and I really would encourage you to have a look at the state snapshot as well. I did have a look at the Arkansas one, and there was 145 students out of that 16,500 who responded to that survey. So it's a really, really brilliant resource, and I really recommend GLSEN for curriculum ideas. They're excellent for that.
Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Dustin.
Typical, right? We have a question from an attendee on Facebook about what do we do when we have colleagues that are resistant to using specific pronouns or names, preferred names for students, and creates more of a kind of a hostile environment where it's half the staff does and half the staff doesn't, or so forth. Do you have any strategies and recommendations for how to overcome those obstacles with colleagues and other educators?
It's very difficult. I do understand that it's difficult, and I think that each situation with that is unique. I do think that sometimes some people are resistant, not out of you know, an actual ingrained bias towards these LGBTQ students. Sometimes it can be related to other aspects, like they are worried that somehow this will cause them extra administrative work by having to create 2 different certificates. You know, sometimes it can be more rooted in that. Sometimes it can be a long process as well of kind of slowly, working with that person. And then sometimes, we do have to understand that we are not going to change other people's minds. What I would say is that if you were working somewhere for that person, where say half the staff are supportive and other staff members are not, it means the absolute world to that student that they have the support of half of the staff. And, even more so if they know that you are someone who supports them and is trying to make sure that the rest of the staff do as well. I suppose the only other way to really get around that would be to, as I say, ingrain it in your school anti-discrimination code or anti-bullying policy. I think a staff member would find it quite difficult to, act in such a way and misgender a student if you are being required, if it states in your anti-discrimination code or policy that students can't misgender or dead name another student or treat them in a negative way, I would think that staff member would find it hard to stand over their decision to do that.
Thank
I
you.
have a clarifying question. What does it mean to dead name?
Oh, so that's sometimes a word that trans people will use when they have changed over their name, or gender non-conforming people. So when they've chosen to use their affirmed name, so their new name, they will sometimes refer to the name that they no longer use as their dead name or their birth name.
Gotcha.
I have another question. Great presentation. Thank you so much for all that you shared. Would love to implement the suggestions at the local level? Living in a conservative state, it's sometimes difficult to get even buy-in from parents. Where do we start? So to create a safe environment must include mental health options for LGBTQ plus students. What resources do you know that are available for teachers or students for mental health?
Well, the Trevor Project would be a really good place to start for mental health. They are very dedicated to fighting the high levels of suicide within LGBTQ youth in the United States. I know how difficult that is as well to that person who says they're living in a conservative state. You do have to remember that, like, I live in Ireland, which is a very predominantly still Catholic country, and all of the students who are coming to our organization, the majority of them attend religious run schools, because almost all schools in Ireland are religious run. So I do sympathize with that. Obviously things are, changing everywhere. Some places they're changing quicker than others. And I do understand that it's hard to get buy-in from parents as well. I think it sounds like you're going in the right direction, though. If you're making it much more broadly about mental health of young people, I think everyone would agree that that's something that, we want to improve and for it to be a positive thing. And so I suppose, that's a great way to incorporate it and say, well, if you believe that it's important that these young people have positive mental health and that they feel safe to come to school, and just to walk down the hallway and use the locker room, then we have to implement certain strategies, to protect that.
That's all the questions I see on Facebook, and I don't see if any of our attendees have one. One of the questions we've had from students in the past is just the introduction of the LGBTQ topics to students, especially at younger levels. I know some teachers have asked me that, what are some resources, what are some tips and strategies that we can work with students that are questioning or that are transitioning, but how to make it a safe and comfortable conversation with other classmates, especially in the elementary grade levels. Do you have any books or resources that you would recommend for age appropriate resources for students?
Sure. Well, as I say, Glisten actually does have all of the, and you can go the whole way up from, I can't think, K to 12 for their different curriculum resources. There has been some research done as well that does say that when, LGBTQ representations, and when that is created as an inclusive curricula, it does benefit all students, not even just students who are LGBTQ or who are very young and who are questioning, and because it makes it just part of the conversation that it's not something that's othered and different. And so I would say definitely, some of those tips that I had about starting small, like having same-sex couple included in a math problem or something like that. Or it could be if you are, say, a science teacher and you are used to maybe giving the background on different scientists, you could include talking about, Alan Turing, the British mathematician who was gay. You can also incorporate it as, say, well, something that I've worked on for part of that book chapter that is forthcoming next year is a curriculum unit on teaching oral history. And I kind of pitched that at around maybe 11 or 12, but you can go younger with that as well. And I've done that around the Stonewall riots. So it's kind of oral history and learning about that through different recordings that we have of people speaking about being there. So it could even be something like that, if you're teaching something where you can kind of incorporate different aspects of things, and that could be part of it. Maybe that could be useful. But I would definitely recommend starting with GLSEN. I think there's another resource as well called the Rainbow Library, or Stonewall as well. They're a UK organization. I'm fairly sure they publish a big list of books, and they kind of give the age brackets around them as well. That could be helpful.
I had a question sent in. Do you find that children who identify as gay at an extremely early age have a tendency to be identified as gifted, or any correlation to the effect?
I have no answer to that question, unfortunately. I have no idea. So my research that I am specifically working on for my EdD is like creating a supportive environment and thinking about leadership for working with LGBTQ gifted kids. The only answers I can give are kind of from my own personal experience working, on our programs. I would predominantly work with kind of 13 to 17-year-olds. I've definitely seen an increase in students identifying as LGBTQ on our programs, particularly identifying as trans or non-binary. But I was also a student on our programs when I was a teenager, and I remember even then, for the first time meeting other students who were my age, who were gifted and also gay. And, that was something that I had encountered in my own life until then. And certainly then from doing some teaching that I've done on the younger courses as well, we have had some students where they've kind of made certain comments that I would lead me to believe maybe that they were questioning or were identifying as gay. But unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that. I'm sure we'd all really like to know if there is a correlation.
Oh, yeah, it was an interesting question. There's another question from one of our attendees. How do we respond when people connect sexual orientation as a factor of mental illness?
Gosh. Tell them they're wrong. No, sorry, that's a short answer. It has been completely stricken from that diagnostic DSM manual as a factor of mental illness. That's a very difficult question to respond to, because it's hard to understand where that person is coming from. I suppose in a way you have to actually, that would be more so what my answer is, try and identify, where is this person coming from? Is this a view that has been ingrained in them for a long time? Is this something just that they have never really questioned or thought of, that maybe actually, by you challenging them in a more gentle way, are you maybe going to change their mind on it? Because sometimes people are not, as I say, coming from a very hostile place. Sometimes people are just really coming from a simply, I've just never thought twice about this. This must be right because I heard it once 30 years ago. And so sometimes you do have to be quite gentle in terms of your approach with it. I know I've certainly done that in the past as well. But yeah, that would be actually probably what my real advice is try and identify where they're coming from with it, and then use that to gauge how you respond.
No, great points. And I think the follow-up question to that was, is there any research that disassociates gender identity from mental illness or something to heal?
So gender dysphoria, I think, has also been taken out of that DSM as part of a mental illness. And there's lots of research that doesn't correlate the two. There's lots of research in that. And of course, there's lots of, trans and gender non-conforming people living their lives perfectly fine and healthy and, with families and jobs and, fulfilled and living their best lives. So I would think that lived experience as well is a really big thing. I think very often sometimes people, like, there is a lot of misinformation obviously out there, and sometimes people can get very wrapped up in trans bodies when we really don't think about other people's bodies anywhere near as much. I don't think. And it's important to more so kind of focus your attention on what is the lived experience of these people. What are they saying and how are they living and feeling, as opposed to, anything else.
No, excellent points. I've heard you speak at the last few NAGCs in Albuquerque, and then of course the more recent one digitally. And every time I feel like I come away with a new idea, strategy of something to help.
Thank you, Justin. That's so nice.
So I appreciate you giving us your time this morning. I don't see any other questions, but lots of thank you. Oh, Beth has one. Okay.
I have a sorry. So mine is more like I'm teach upper elementary, and I think some people feel that if they ignore the non-binary or non-conforming student, they might just be playing. Like in my student that I'm concerned about, they knew who they were, you know what I'm saying? And it was hard for me to not understand how the other teachers didn't see that. This wasn't wishy-washy role playing. This was part of their identity. And like, I don't know. I guess there's a question for that, but I get, it's just a hard thing for some elementary staff to accept about students. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my point to that would be two things. Is that I would question somebody who says, well, how do they know who they are at such a young age, by asking them, well, did you know how you felt? Did you feel like you were a boy or a girl, or did you feel like you didn't fit into either of those things when you were 7 or 8 years old?
Gotcha. Thank you.
What were the feelings you had about that? And then also my stance on it is always, I am an educator and I come from a place of support, and it's really not up to me to be kind of thinking about anything past this child in front of me right now, which is creating a safe environment for them, that you want them to feel just like all the other students, just safe, that they can kind of thrive, and not to be thinking about anything else past that, because that's not really part of our job.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions? We have Orla all the way from Ireland here to help address a very timely topic. We do have a comment in Facebook that one of the teachers expects, or one of our GT coordinators expects all of his teachers to have a safe place for all students and to serve as their students' advocate, period. They want their students to thrive regardless of race, sex, religion, and identity.
That's great. Those students are very lucky to have that person and all of those staff members.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes a little bit in Zoom for people to type their question, or on Facebook. But regardless, this has been very educational, and it is very timely right now. As an organization, our job is to always protect and provide opportunities for our students in Arkansas, especially our gifted students. But this is not just limited to identified gifted students. This is a relevant topic for all educators, especially ours in Arkansas, since this is such a political hotbed right now of issues. But all right. Well, Orla, I appreciate your time on your Saturday afternoon, our Saturday morning. And again, I know we have lots of people that have already requested further recordings of things that we've said, and lots of people saying thank you for all your insight and strategies. So on behalf of
my absolute pleasure, and I will send a copy of this presentation maybe to Justin and to Beth, if you guys want to send it to anyone, or if anyone wants to contact me directly, if you had any questions again that maybe you wanted to wait and ask one-on-one, absolutely no problem with that. I can be contacted at any time. You'll have my email.
Excellent. On behalf of Agate, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Everyone, enjoy your Saturday.
All right. Bye-bye.